Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK radio network. Any opinions or comments made by any guest are their own, and they do not necessarily reflect any of the presenters or network's opinions.
This man in the saucer, can you describe him?
Well, sir, he was small and skinny. He had his head was pointed, came to a very sharp point. He had long green hair. His eyes were a sort of purplish red. He had large ears which were formed like an antenna. His teeth were perfect, but spread far apart. And I noticed, too, a jacket of some sort of spun glass and bright red metallic hues.
You say this all took place in a few seconds. Mr. Nagelschmidt, can you tell me what color tie I'm wearing?
I'm sorry, sir. I didn't notice.
You mean to say you can remember everything about this man from the spaceship, his hair, the color of his eyes, the clothing he was wearing, and yet, after all this time, you can't tell me the color of my tie?
But you didn't come out of a flying saucer.
Hello, this is Nick Pope, and you're listening to the Paranormal UK radio network, the UK's biggest paranormal network. And this is Paranormal Dimensions with David Young.
For me, this is the kind of show that I like doing most, where you basically just have a freewheeling discussion, have a chance to go off on topics. That's what's going to make you an outstanding player in the field. Just keep doing it.
Hello and welcome to the show once again. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for the introduction, Nick, and thank you for those very kind words, Peter Robbins. I have another wonderful guest for the show today. It's the very well-known Mary Rodwell. But just before we start the main show, I'd just like to say thank you for the emails and messages, etc. that you send me. I'd just like to say most of the messages I get are sort of like suggestions for future guests, etc. Some of the guests I've already had on previously on other shows. Some interesting suggestions also come along. I did have a suggestion for someone who's not with us anymore, so that might be a bit difficult. But apart from that, if you would like to get in touch with me at any time, my email address is davidyoung2qn@yahoo.co.uk. That's davidyoung, 2qn, that's all one word, at yahoo.co.uk. Okay, today's guest, Mary Rodwell. Now, many people around the world from all walks of life believe themselves to be in regular contact with beings from outer space. Mary Rodwell, trained nurse, midwife and therapist, works with individuals said to be having these remarkable experiences. She claims they are not products of overactive imaginations, quite the opposite. They are real and happening to normal, healthy people. Some people are aware of it, but many are completely in the dark, as ET encounters occur in numerous ways. The process of waking up to this multidimensional reality is not always easy, but the results are positively life-changing, such as spiritual transformation and expanded awareness. Are you ready to ask, am I experiencing alien contact? Okay, her latest book, The New Human, Awakening to Our Cosmic Heritage. Just before the introduction, there's a few lines by Mike Oram, who wrote a book called Does It Rain in Other Dimensions? That's Mike Oram of UK. And what it says is, my real parents are in space. It says, Mum, you are my parents as far as bringing me onto this planet, but my real parents are in space. I come from somewhere out there. Something of great importance is going to happen on this earth. Not in your lifetime, but in mine. It will affect all units of consciousness, whether they are mineral, vegetable, animal or man. It is to do with global consciousness, a vast change of consciousness, and that is why I'm here at this time, to experience this change. Then that's Mike Oram at 4 years old. Then it goes on. The light beings told me that energy was heading our way, and the essence of that energy was light, and this light would be of a frequency that would repair our DNA. They said it would make us more complete and who we really are. This would enable us to have a different reality by moving frequency. When this is, I do not know, but if I go with my feelings, then I would have to say it's just around the corner. So that's from Does It Rain in Other Dimensions by Mike Oram. That's in Mary Rodwell's book, The New Human, just before the introduction. So that kind of describes a little bit as to where this show will be going, and that kind of conversation. So, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Mary Rodwell. Hello Mary, welcome to the show.
David, an absolute pleasure. Lovely to meet you again, as you reminded me that we met in Hull some years ago.
We did, very briefly, and as I was saying to you, you signed a couple of your two books, The New Human and Awakening. You kindly signed them for me, and they're very interesting books indeed, I must say, and as was your talk. And it was, I'd heard about you, well, obviously for many years, but that was the first chance I had to actually come and see you speak. I know you get around quite a bit, but I think it's, trying to get to the same places every time, it's not always easy. But also, you've probably not been out of trouble very much lately.
Well, David, actually, I haven't missed it, because you're quite right. I was, every 1 to 2 months I was off somewhere else, and it got really tiring, because I did, lots of places in the US, and also, Brazil a couple of times in 1 year, as well as Hong Kong, and, various places in the Med. I'd done Malta at one point, and a whole range of other places. So actually it's been quite nice to be at home. I mean, a lot of the conferences you're probably aware of have had to go online because of the fact that, unless you're actually in the country, you can't get to them. And I haven't actually missed, all the stress of traveling, although I do miss not meeting the people, all the beautiful souls you meet in these conferences.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean by the stress of travelling. It's not a pleasure at all. And I think we ought to point out that you're speaking from Australia and I'm in the UK, so we've got the magic of the internet to help us with that one. As I was just saying to you, it's sweltering hot here, and I understand it's winter in Australia, and I was assuming it was as hot as it is here, or it usually is. I get the picture that Australia's always hot, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, you are. If you're somewhere in the Blue Mountains or anywhere around there, they often have snow around this time of year. So, but here I'm subtropical. We grow pineapples and mangoes down, in the garden. It's just fine with the Great Barrier Reef. So, but it does get cool in the mornings. It gets as low as maybe, 15 degrees Celsius, right. Which is...
That's warm here. Yeah, I think that's quite a nice, pleasant temperature here. But, but pineapples and mangoes, are two of my favourite fruits. That's lovely. But anyway, Mary, I guess we better start. I'd like to actually talk about a little bit about your earlier book, Awakening. It's how extraterrestrial contact can transform your life. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what made you write that book?
Absolutely. As you know, I'm a counsellor, a professional counsellor and hypnotherapist. And what happened was when I finally discovered that, I think it was in 1995, when my first client, someone you will know in the UK, Ellis Taylor, was my very first client. Yeah. And Elle came to me and he said, look, there's no support groups for this. People just think you're a loony, and said, I've heard you're open-minded, can you help? And that was really the start, because Ellis is so articulate, and he was obviously, there was no sense that there was something weird with Ellis at all. He's very grounded, he's very articulate, as I say, and he was having marks on his body, shaved areas and what have you. And that my delving down the rabbit hole. I mean, luckily I'd read a couple of books previously very soon before Ellis came to see me, and one was abduction by Dr. John Mack, the professor of psychiatry at Harvard University, and he wrote Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens. And being a professor of psychiatry, you don't dismiss that very lightly. And then, of course, Communion, Whitley Strieber. And then it started the ball rolling, because Ellis came. Then 2 weeks later, a lady came and told me she was having experiences completely, again, out of the blue. I met a social worker that was having experiences, and we started a support group where 12 people turned up, our very first support group. And I got to understand this was a lot more common than I ever imagined it was. And it was by the time I wrote Awakening, I had then been seeing regularly, doing experiencer groups, etc. And a lot of the questions came up which were the same, like, how do I know this is real? How do I know I'm not imagining things? You know, what does it mean? How do I know this is, what about these strange experiences? You know, how do I understand them? What about the fear? How do I deal with all those kinds of questions? Kept coming up time and time again. And I realized that many people were afraid to go and see a psychologist, and certainly not a psychiatrist, because of what can happen when you do. So I thought, well, if I can give them a self-help resource book, then they can work through this process of coming to terms with their experiences on their own if they have to, with lots of resources and things. And that was really how it started. Each time some question came up, like implants, missing pregnancies, or psychic abilities, all these things came up with people having experiences. So I did a chapter literally on everything I could think of that would make sense and help people validate and come to terms with their experiences. So to me, that was what was important, because there was no book out there that was taking people through that process. The case studies, what have you, but there was nothing saying this is how it works, or this is what the issues people are dealing with when they have this experience. And we were talking just a few minutes ago, David, about the fact, that are you a believer or not a believer? And I said, it's not about belief. This is a reality that people experience. They don't believe in aliens and then have the experiences. Many of them have told me they never even watched Star Trek, or they've never even looked at the alien phenomena at all. So this isn't coming from a belief whatsoever. This is coming for many people from the experience where they end up having to believe it because it's real for them.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've heard that so many times, that you become a believer when it happens to you.
Exactly.
You say you're not just a believer then, you're an experiencer too by then. I was quite interested about the implants that you were mentioning. Did you come across many people with implants?
Yes, and there's, I wrote a chapter on it because there are the solid ones that, Dr. Roger Lear, who became a good friend and colleague, he took it before he died, passed away. He'd taken about 15, filmed them, had them investigated. Some were biological, some were magnetic. There was a whole range of ones that he had taken out from various people. But there are also something called, I call them energy implants, if you like. They're almost like an energetic implant. And some of those can be moved through working with someone. You can actually get them to move these energetic implants. And I talk about it in depth in the book itself. But the more solid ones, obviously, if you think you have one, you need to go to someone who's open to looking into it for you. And unfortunately, there's not many medical that would do that. But I think there are some that are following with Dr. Lear's work and are still removing some of them. But not all of them, David, are negative either. Some of them, I remember Tracy Taylor talking about her implant in her arm. And she said that it was actually a conduit for helping her do her drawings. And she found it very positive. And others, when they've had hypnosis and have found out why the implant was put there, often it's been very helpful, or it's been a way of being supportive of their connection to these beings. So, there's a lot of judgment around, oh, it's an implant, it's got to be bad. Not at all. Except for maybe the ones from the military, and that's a whole nother story.
Yeah. Well, I was going to actually ask you, who's actually putting these implants? Are they done because of alien abductions, obviously, with some of them? And like you said, we've got the military implants. So for what purposes are they being put there? I was going to say to you, are they in some instances evil? But, and as you say, and sometimes it seems to help people as well. Do you think there's some sort of a medical intervention sometimes?
One of the interesting things, as you know, I was one of the co-founders of the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation, and in the surveys that we did, in terms of 600 questions, I think 600 to 700 questions, over 4,200 people, and it's all in the book Beyond UFOs, and in there, what we discovered, and this is all new information because there's never been a study like it ever before, this one, was 50% of people on board craft have healing procedures. And there's a whole chapter in Beyond UFOs of people that have had these healing procedures, and some of them from very serious illnesses as well. And this is not generally known. Preston Dennett has written about a book called UFO Healings, but he also did a chapter in the book. So this is what people don't realize, that there are some of these implants have been to help with healing. A lot of the negative ones are primarily, I believe, military, because they've been abducted by by these covert agencies, and there's that's a whole another ball game, and that's quite different in terms of why they're putting implants there.
Now, do you think the military are actually working with aliens in some respects?
Well, it's a very hard one to know, because I've got no, what I would call solid data. I know some people, when they're taken by the military in these underground bases, have seen what they believe to be non-human intelligences as well, such as reptilians, such as greys, for example. But we also know that what is happening with some of these, they could be what they're called programmed life forms that aren't actually ET, but have been cloned from genetic material from these intelligences. So whether or not they're working with some of them and that's real, or whether these are just clones that are programmed by the military, it's hard to know. But I know that some whistleblowers, they have said they've seen these programmed life forms, which some of them are greys and some of them are reptilians, and they were saying that they are actually not true ETs. They're just cloned. So it goes into a really dark rabbit hole where there's all sorts of things that we don't know for sure. But of course, some of the whistleblowers have said that certain intelligences have worked with our military and there's been a trade. That may be so, but I really don't know, David, for sure, any of that.
Now, I know you're mentioning reptilians. Now, as I understand it, reptilians are on a different dimensional plane. So do they actually, are they on a physical plane as well? Do you see what I'm saying about, so if they can interact with the military, they must be on our physical plane as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I've, an interesting thing with reptilians, that they sometimes get a very bad press, but I have come to understand there are many people that have had very positive, loving encounters with some reptilians. And Barbara Lamb, who's very well known in ufology, actually told me of an experience she had when she walked into a house once and there was this 7-foot reptilian, and all that she got from him was love and acceptance, and she had the most amazing experience. So I believe that there are physical ones, but we also, what people don't always understand is that we're interacting with more than just physical beings. Sometimes they're interdimensional, extra-dimensional, trans-dimensional, and there's even a suggestion some of them have come from our future. So, it's not so easy to put them into a black and white box anyway. And of course, a lot mix up. I don't realize that, somebody may see because they're more religious, perhaps see an angel, but somebody else may see the same being and just call it a light being. So we've got this whole confusion out of perceptions and our programming that decides what it may be, whereas in fact, it can be a whole range of things, because some of them certainly are coming from other dimensions.
Yeah. Well, I know Ellis has spoken about reptilians quite a lot, hasn't he, when he gives these talks. And he gives a kind of a scary aspect to it. Do you agree?
Look, certainly they can look very scary, but what I've said it to people when they've had experiences with various different beings, what I've said to them is, take no notice of what anybody else says. What is your experience or your feeling around this particular, whether it's a grey, whether it's a reptilian or humanoid or whatever it is, what are you feeling from that being? Because that's accurate for you, not necessarily what other people are saying, because other people may very well be judging them simply because they look scary. Doesn't mean they're bad. There are, and it's like the greys. There's all sorts of things said about different greys, the zetas. I've heard that there's at least, from one lady, there's at least 165 species of grey.
Wow.
So you can't just pick a grey out of the ether and say, well, they're all bad. In fact, I've many people who've had the most loving experiences with greys, and others that have been terrified of them. So what I can only say from all those, I've worked with about 3,500 families and children and people with experiences, is that there's a whole matrix of experience with different beings, and many that are not talked about, like crystalline beings, geometric beings, and of course the mantis are another one, and the lion and felines, for example. There's ant-like beings as well as the mantis. There's a whole range of humanoids, blue beings, etc., etc. So what I say to people when they see or experience one of these beings or intelligences is, what are you feeling from them? What's your sense for you? And that's the thing to trust, because ultimately that's all we've ever got, because everyone else can be scared for all sorts of different reasons. It doesn't mean that just because something looks a bit ugly to us that it may necessarily be bad. We're very discriminatory on this planet, It depends on what you look like and how people judge you. We've got to get over that.
But many of the people that you've spoken to, do they think they're going mad in some way, or are they certain of what they're seeing and they need someone to talk to about it?
It's a good question, David, and there is quite a percentage that are questioning their sanity, simply because if they've ever talked about it, the family switches off or looks very fearful, or their partner does, or they say you need to go and see someone because, plainly, there's something wrong with you. And the sad thing for me is that a number of them have gone and ended up in taking medication or ending up in a hospital because of it. And in awakening, I mean, there's the story of the 19-year-old that contacted me who said at 14, her name, I called her Kathy, at 14 told me that she had gone to the doctor and said she was seeing aliens, and he said that you are schizophrenic, and he loaded her with all this medication. She tried to take her life several times until she got to 19, where she saw a talk show, a US talk show, where they were talking about this, and she realized maybe she wasn't crazy after all. And in my book Awakening, I tackle that in a whole chapter. How do you know you're not crazy? As a way of showing people how you work out whether or not this is a reality. And the truth is that, when people get to understand more, often they're less frightened. They start to understand a little bit more about what's going on. They start to realize they're not alone, for a start. And then they start to understand that some of the things they're experiencing, other people experience as well. And that's why I run my resource, because I'm able to put their mind at rest. If they say, well, I've experienced this or I've experienced that, I can say, well, that's very common. That's part of the pattern. And one of the things I do, David, when people contact me is I send them out my questionnaire, because that shows them the many ways you can have contact. And there'll be some that are very comfortable with it. They've known it all their lives. It's never been threatening. It's never been fearful. They've been more scared about being on a planet where people are still very primitive, as they think, and they don't feel like they belong here. They feel like, their home is somewhere else. And, you know, that they really struggle with being on the planet because they got a sense of coming from somewhere else, like some other planet or some other dimension or whatever. And their biggest problem is having to keep quiet because they feel so different to everyone else. To the others that really struggle to believe this is a reality and that we're not alone because they've been programmed all through their lives only to trust their five senses. So as soon as they feeling things intuitively or starting seeing balls of light or energy fields or start seeing the beings, then they immediately think, well, there's, you know, either there's something wrong with my eyes or I'm going mad. Yeah. So I get both ends of the spectrum, David, to be honest.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, is there any sort of a psychological test you're able to do on it? You know, a lot of physical tests and things. Are there any sort of apparatus and things that you can use?
I don't know. I'm sure that what Dr. Mack did was he gave them all the psychological testing, the ones that he worked with and wrote about in both his books. So he made sure that they were, you know, psychologically sound. And, you know, he had no doubts in the end that they were. But the only thing you could actually tell would be from, I suppose, the fact that there's been a couple of, more than a couple really, have told me that their DNA there's been an unknown component in their DNA when they've had that done. The other thing is the implants, some of them are solid and can be seen on X-ray for sure, which would also indicate a reality. But the biggest reality, more than anything else, and I've said this so many times, is the way people change after their experiences. And what we discovered with the Dr. Edgar Mitchell surveys was 85% of the 4,200 people noticed a psycho-spiritual change in themselves where they became more sensitive, where they found that they felt more connected to the planet, where they wanted a more holistic lifestyle. Often they changed their diet. Some started doing drawings of the beings or doing strange, unusual artwork or strange symbols, or coming out with these languages we call star languages or light language, or, for example. So there were a whole range of creative expressions that were indicating something very profound had happened to them over this experience. And it's not something you do after a fantasy. You don't change in amazingly profound ways where they become more empathic and more connected to people, wanting to do healing or doing energy work and what have you. All these changes happen after contact, and there is your evidence in the changes in individuals and people.
Right. And I suppose a major question comes out of that is, why us? Are we anything special in the universe? You know, I mean, because there's billions of planets out there, I assume. I've not seen them physically. But, yeah, why would it be us? Or do you think it would be a universal thing that this contact is taking place?
Well, let me describe what an 8-year-old told me when she'd been taken a few days previously on board a craft, where she was taken and shown how to use her psychic abilities in what I call the space schools. She explained to me they showed her genetic engineering, how they were mixing species with indigenous DNA on many planets. They told her they did this on many, many planets, and including Earth, that they would take the indigenous, being, if you like, or whoever was natural to the planet, and they would add their own DNA to upgrade that particular species. And they were telling her they did it on many star systems all over the cosmos. And that makes us one of, if you like, a program. And everything that I think I'm hearing about is that we have this addition of 225 genes to our DNA that nobody can explain, to give you a bit of an example. And there's been many of those that have had communication with the beings have been told at least 12 inserts of DNA from these intelligences has happened to create Homo sapiens sapiens. And of course it all ties into the gods that came down, and really we have to start seeing this in a modern understanding, which is the gods were in fact ETs. They weren't gods at all. They were just beings with a better technology than we had, and they would have seemed like gods. But it's in our DNA. One of the interesting things that I really valued from Command Sergeant Robert Dean, who was well known by anyone in ufology, who is a lovely bloke, finally passed away in his 80s, explained that he went on and he was he knew about all the ET stuff from the military, because it was one of those high, beyond top secret, cosmic secret type, information. The military were already admitting they knew that was several species that were interacting with us, but he'd never admitted until the last few years of his life that he'd been on board craft, and that he'd actually been told that we were at least a mix of 12 different extraterrestrial species. And that was, the first time he'd ever admitted, as far as I was aware, that he'd actually been, publicly that is, that he'd actually been on the spacecraft and had this information given to him. And our DNA is the mystery, really, because even Dr. Francis Crick, co-founder of the DNA molecule, said that he believed that we'd been created by an extraterrestrial species, and talked about that in Life Itself, the book he wrote.
Interesting. I mean, I'm very interested in the ancient alien theory anyway. Having met Eric von Daniken a few times myself, he's a very interesting character. But, and also the ancient buildings and everything. I mean, is it your actual belief that the aliens did help build those buildings? The structures and the pyramids, etc.?
I'm pretty certain they did. And I'll give you a very interesting little testimony from a 5-year-old whose mother was reading him a story about the pyramids and how the slaves went to build the pyramids and what have you. And he said to her, "That's all wrong, Mum. That's not true. Because I was there. And they changed the density of objects, large and small, and they levitated them into place," he explained. And this was a 5-year-old explaining what actually happened. And interestingly, there are a lot of those that are aware of the fact that this was really the reason they could move these huge blocks was actually through levitation.
I actually believe that, and I agree with it, because when you look at the size of some of these structures and the size of the blocks, no way could they be lifting those great big blocks up slopes the way they're describing. So I just can't see that that description myself. Not with ropes and pulleys and just manpower. I just don't think anyone could do that.
I don't think we could do it today with all.
No, I agree with you. I don't think we could. I mean, I wish somebody would actually. I think somebody did try to set that up, didn't they? And I don't know how successful it was. Because, I mean, even back then, they didn't have, logs. If you assume they pulled these slopes, these big rocks along on logs, they didn't have any logs back then. It was all palm trees. So, but I guess that's a whole different sort of ball game we're talking about there. But it's an interesting subject. I just wanted your sort of take on it. I certainly believe there was Ancient Aliens anyway. I can't remember if you've been on. I think you have appeared on Ancient Aliens, haven't you? Or am I wrong?
No, I have on the Gaia side of things as well, but I have been in a number of documentaries, but I haven't done the Ancient Aliens one, although I was asked. But I'll tell you why I'm so fascinated by it, apart from Hidden Archaeology by Michael Cremo. I don't know if you've read any of his stuff.
I've heard.
Where he talks.
Yeah, I've heard of him, yeah.
Amazing book on what's found in coal and what have you. Nails have been found in coal and what have you. Millions of years before we're supposed to have, come to this planet or whatever. And he says that, there's been civilizations, literally in the millions, not a couple of 100,000 and all the rest of it that we've been told about as well. But there are so many anomalies found in rock and in coal and what have you that are literally millions of years old. So, that's just a start. But the bottom line is that we're not told the truth, David. You know that.
Yeah.
We're not told the truth on our origins. And
I don't think we're told the truth about anything, to be honest.
Everything, is an edited truth. And this is the one thing I think that I've learned by being involved in this phenomena, is that I've had to start again, look into everything with a lot more determination to find the truth. And if you look hard enough, you can see how much we've been lied to about everything, literally everything. It's you literally have to start again. And that's made me very distrustful now of any of the, the documentaries that are out there and what have you, because it's all an edited truth. And it's, they do a little bit of digging and a little bit here and there, and we're supposed to take that as it is. And of course, with the wars and all the rest of it, the only one who writes about the wars are the winners. So you don't actually even know the truth of our history anyway.
Yeah.
And I think with the DNA particularly, there have been a number of whistleblowers that have looked at human DNA and said you can see where the DNA is being spliced and put back together again. And there's a number of whistleblowers that have actually admitted that, that we are created. And they said if they talked about it publicly, they'd be strung up from the nearest tree. So you can't speak truth, because as soon as it's against the narrative of what, the popular narrative, you're ignored and dismissed.
Yeah. I mean, as you know, the world's in quite an upheaval at the moment. Would you think the aliens are actually sitting back and watching what's going on? Or is there some sort of evil alien influence who is actually causing it? I think you know what I'm talking about. We don't want to go too far into the subject, but...
Well, I'll try not to get too far down the rabbit hole. I mean, a lot of people have wondered about the ones that literally have the power over, we call them the elite, we call them a lot of different names, the cabal, all these different ones. Are they influenced by negative entities that could be, and it's suggested maybe, reptilians, Dracos, a few others that don't have our well-being? That's quite possible, because people are influenced by the non-physical realm. We know that by entities, and this kind of thing can be, they can be influenced by them. That's of course quite possible. But at the same time, we hear that they are, this elite do very, work with energy, do various magical things that, for controlling people as well. So it may be part of all of that. I don't dismiss anything to do with working with energy in a negative sense rather than a positive sense. I personally do think, apart from the fact that I'm pretty aware that the ones at the top do not have our best interests at heart. And the only reason that I say that is because of what I have perceived just looking into the corruption on this planet. And it is rife in the echelons, the higher echelons of our society. It is absolutely rife. And, that goes from the governments right through to the, big pharma, to corporations, to banks, to, that their mandate isn't for humanity's best interest. Their mandate is for their own power and greed. So, what do you get at the end of it? You get the rest of us having to survive and work around their control. Yeah.
I mean, do you feel that there's a major battle against good and evil, in the spiritual realm going on? Because that's what I've understood from a few other people. That's kind of the way I see it myself. That there's some massive battle going on. I don't know how you see it.
I absolutely do see that. I have no doubts whatsoever that what's going on now is a time of awakening for humanity to either finally take back its rightful heritage or lose it. And it's being asked of us all to stand in our truth. And, this is the big one. People are calling it the Third World War. And it's all this, I'm going to use the word scam, that's been put out there, and it's using fear to put us all back in our box. And this is how it works. And I believe even with the UFO phenomena that we're really, as a shaman, the shaman has to transcend their human fears to be able to operate in a multi-dimensional universe. And we're being tasked to do exactly the same. We're being tasked to transcend human fears, our human fears, so we can be part of a new awakened society. And that's exactly what I think is going on now, is are you going to buy into the fear and stop it doing what you've come here to do, and that's speak your truth and live your truth. Because if we want a future for our children and our grandchildren, we really have now got to do that. We have got to stop, because they're saying silence is compliance.
Yeah.
This is the bottom line. Do you sit by and you say, well, it's nothing to do with me, or I can't do anything, or whatever. If we do that, we are not going to change what is really very wrong and what's going on the planet now. And anyone who's done any research will see enough to see the red flags there. And I mean, I'm a nurse and a midwife, and I can tell you what, I can smell a rat when it comes to what's going on here. But you don't even have to have that. I mean, it's actually all out there if you look. Yeah,
I think a lot of us smelt a very smelly rat at least a year ago. With everything that's happening. But I think that actually brings us quite nicely into your next book, The New Human and the Awakening of Our Cosmic Heritage. It's kind of where you were coming from there, wasn't it?
Well, the reason I wrote that was I was getting so many amazing stories from children who were not being hypnotized, that were talking to their parents about their experiences. Some of them were talking about their past lives, coming from other planets, what form they took, why they'd come and incarnated into this planet. One young lad told his mum that he was a blue being. He decided to come to this planet for the first time because he had certain skills that will help him deal with the pollution on this planet. Other kids talked about going on board craft and being shown how to use abilities, their psychic abilities. They talked about using their own energies, learning complex subjects such as physics, origin of the species, cosmology, etc., etc. And these are ages from 5, upwards. And some of the subjects they were talking about were really complex. So I felt really strongly that because the parents didn't know what to do about these kids, what to say to them or how to help them, it was more and more, I thought, the more that I heard it, it had such an integrity because it wasn't programmed. It was a clarity that came without any form of manipulation or whatever. And it was talking about a truth that we're not alone, that we have all come from other places to incarnate on this planet, and explained, more about our greater heritage, where many of us are literally connected to many of these intelligences that we are hearing about, because they're in fact the family. As one 8-year-old told me about the mantis beings, he said, they're my family, and when I die, I'm going back to being a mantis.
The reincarnation aspect seems to come into the theory quite a bit, which I do believe in also. Do you hear many first-hand stories about reincarnation? I mean, for instance, yourself, do you know of any past lives that you've had?
Yes and yes. I will say that I started to look into reincarnation, in my early 20s, really, even though my religion at the time, which isn't my religion anymore, because I'm not religious in that sense, said that there was no such thing. But I was reading accounts of people that had had experiences where they remembered past lives. And so someone offered to regress me, and I did it out of curiosity more than anything else. And what was weird is I actually remembered 3 lifetimes, one of them as a Roman soldier, I might add. And I came out with things that I had no conscious, understanding of. I was using terms that I would never use. And one of them was because of being a Roman soldier, I ended up in Hadrian's Wall and protecting it from what I called were the barbarians. Now, I would never have called the Scots the barbarians in a million years, but apparently that's what the Romans called them, was barbarians.
Yeah, I think the Scots thought of the Romans the other way round as well, didn't they? They thought of those as the barbarians.
Yeah, and I mentioned all sorts of other things. So I was intrigued by that, and ultimately I did my clinical hypnotherapy. They didn't do past lives, but at least I learnt the techniques. And I've done hundreds now of past life regressions, and always, you take somebody through a death sequence and they find themselves in the spiritual realm where they reappraise their life on previous life, what they learned, what they gained, what they felt they did well, and then talking about coming to the present life and choosing their parents, choosing their siblings, and some of the experiences they want on this particular life. So for me, it's not a question is there such a thing as reincarnation? It's just very real in the sense of the hundreds that I've worked with. And the interesting thing is the kids talk about it. One little boy of 9, I think, explained how he came here. He explained he was a will-o'-the-wisp spirit, and then he was shown 3 different lives, and he wanted, and found himself in mummy's tummy, and went on from there. So a lot of them have got conscious recall of where they were. Some kids have in my book, The New Human, one kid talked about being in a crystal planet with her grandmother, another one on a water planet, for example, in another form. And this is as real to them as talking about, they went to school yesterday or whatever. Gradually their memories do seem to fade in some of them when they get older, when they start to get into their teenage years. But it is absolutely clear as day for some of them when they're younger. And part of the reason they feel so connected to these beings that visit them is because they say they're family. That they remember them from when they were the same type of being. And what's happening, I understand it this way, is that a lot of these, extraterrestrial intelligences that care about planet Earth, and there's many, they are allowing some of the souls to incarnate into human form to help with what's happening on this planet right now, this big awakening, this big shift in consciousness. And that's why so many people are saying, well, I think I'm a hybrid. And I've talked about the hybrids as well, as those are having more ET-DNA, and they identify absolutely as being a hybrid. And I write about that as well, where some of the young people have said, I'm a hybrid, and my primary origin is Pleiadian or Arcturian or from Orion or whatever, and they have absolute knowing that that's their heritage.
Well, it kind of links to what I mentioned earlier about it being a universal thing, about the interest in us as creatures or as beings or whatever. I'd like to bring in, Bill Rook. I had Bill on the show a couple of shows back. Your name came up, and he's done quite a bit of, he's spoken to you quite a lot. I wonder if you had any comments to make about Bill.
Oh, I think Bill is
not rude ones, though.
And of course, no,
Nice.
he's a lovely soul, and we've had several wonderful conversations, and of course we've met up a few times in Leeds and Hull. What I love about what Bill's doing is he's very connected to what the phenomena we call the orbs or balls of light. There's lots of different names they're given, and I've had some beautiful pics of orbs myself. In fact, called one in and got a friend to photograph it because I said, that they are attracted to consciousness. And I remember going out in my balcony. I've got a picture of it where I said to a friend of mine, get the camera and I'm going to call one in and see if it comes. And so I did my calling out, come on guys, show yourselves. And I said, please show yourselves. And the next thing, when I felt it was there, I couldn't see it, but I felt something was there. I asked them to take the photograph, and a meter from my hand was a ball of light. So I know that, and these aren't dust particles. They're not water droplets at all. There's been so many. The Orb project was put together about the reality of orbs by a physicist, a German physicist, and so the book, The Orb Project's really good. Anyone interested in orbs would find it so. But in my last presentation called Contact, there was a beautiful gentleman, a retired pilot, Jimmy Jones, who explained his experience with a ball of light. That was his contact, and many people are having communication with the ball of light, which is actually, in many cases, us out of body. Right. I've come to an absolute certainty that when we travel out of body, we become a ball of light. They call it the Merkaba. There's another name for it. But when we leave our bodies, that's often the form we take, and we go out in that form, and that's what you're seeing. And I've had so much evidence this is the case. There was a lovely 15-year-old I did a regression when I was in England, and he was explaining how an ET, visited him in the garden, and then he said, there's 3 balls of light, golden balls of light. One's granddad, one's great-granddad, and one's, I think, his uncle. And I said, how did you know who they were? And he said, because I just know they're here. They're telling me they're here because they don't want me to be frightened. So he got the spirits that were in balls of light from his relatives. And when the ETs left in the craft, he said, they've all gone with the ETs. In other words, these balls of light went on the craft too. So he'd seen them. He recognized who the balls of light were as his family, his great-granddad, and as I say, some relatives of his. So, there's so much evidence, David, of what they are now and how they're conscious and how they're around us. And I mean, we're seeing it with the cameras all the time now, Yeah. You see moving and what have you. So Bill, getting back to Bill, he's doing a great job in, making this credible and helping it to be credible. And as it is credible, absolutely. And I think we're going to find out a lot more as time goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to his book, which has been in the process for, probably about at least 2 years now. I think probably getting on for 3. But, eventually I hope it gets out. But, I told Bill about, I'd taken quite a few, old pictures myself up at Rendlesham Woods, to be honest. I've mentioned it on this show before, so if you've heard this before, not to you, Mary, but to other people. Normally when you take photos in the woods, they all just come out black. And then you'll take a sequence of photos and they get all loads of orbs in them. And then suddenly it'll just go back to black again. Yeah. So, if it was dust and moisture, you'd get that in every photo, wouldn't you? That's the way I see it. And I've only ever seen two orbs with my naked eyes, and that was like they were like a red orb. And I was with somebody else at the time, and they said you saw that as well, didn't you? And which was quite interesting. But normally you don't see anything.
Well, it's interesting that some that are more intuitive can often see them physically as well. It's just that it seems that you just need a broader spectrum of your visual sight for some people to be able to perceive them and what have you, but others can just sense them around, and I have done. I've sensed when they're there, but I can't physically see them. And that, and I've even requested different colours. Right. I went out in my veranda one time and said, I'd really love a nice blue one, I'd really love to see a nice blue one. The next photograph I took, would you believe, there was a blue orb in it. And I just thought, you know what? I don't really need any more validation. It's, if you just give yourself a chance, you'll be amazed.
I will have to try that. But I have got some amazing photos myself in all different colours. Really, again, if they were like dust particles or moisture particles, they'd all be more or less the same colour. But you get a vast arrangement of different colours, don't you, and sizes.
Well, I can tell you can. You're absolutely right. And sometimes you'll take one picture and there might be 3 in the picture, the next one, it's covered in them.
Yeah.
You know, it can be as fast as that. There's just too much research done now to dismiss there's no doubt. I mean, the interesting thing is that there's so many taking them now with different cameras. It's like the craft. You know, you can be taking a picture of something, and then when you look at it afterwards, you can see a craft in there. You know, you can see various craft or whatever. We don't always see what's there because we don't have the opportunity to. You need the night vision. When I was at ESETI in the States, they had all the night vision goggles, and it's amazing what you can see, which you can't see with your physical eyes, and what you can actually see when you've got those kinds of glasses on as well. So for anyone that's not sure, there's some brilliant books out there that will show you that this is real. And I honestly believe a lot of them, some of them may very well be craft, but some of them are actually spirits, and that's the form they take.
I mean, I tend to believe that they're out there all the time, but we just can't see them, like you've just basically said.
Yeah.
Do you feel they're on like a different vibration plane so that we don't see them, like a cloaking mechanism?
Oh, I'm pretty certain that's what it's about. We're at one frequency and they're another. It's like some people can see spirits and ghosts, as they call them, and others can't. You know, it's just a different frequency.
Yeah, which again, I believe they're around us all the time.
Yeah, I think, you know, I absolutely believe that too, David. And anyone who can feel energy and feel presences around them, and there's so many people I talk to that do, I'm saying, well, they're there. It's just that we haven't yet fully acknowledged the fact that there's a non-physical realm, and we have a modern picture of psychology that doesn't allow us anything other than the physical senses, where in fact we're a consciousness that inhabits this physical container. And that is what goes out of body and leaves our physical body behind. And we will then be, in many cases, that form that we're feeling, or we can be the presence somewhere else.
Yeah, entirely. About the UFO field in Australia, is it something that happens a lot there? I mean, are there a lot of organisations? I guess there must be one major organisation in Australia.
Well, actually, there's lots of little pockets of organisations. There's one for Queensland that's in Brisbane with Cheryl Gottschall. There's another one. There's a couple in Sydney, UFORC, and there's another one there. There's one down in Melbourne, and there's one down in Adelaide, and I don't think now. I'm not sure about Perth anymore. But they're not. None of the. There's no complete one for all of Australia as it is. I mean, I've got my own organisation, but although I will take on sightings, because I say to people that have sightings, you know, often when people have a sighting, they've also had an interaction they don't always realise. And so I check they've not had experience as well. But most of the time it's more about people having experiences with the craft that contact me, but I still get a fair number of sightings. So the media do know about me and will ask me various things. So, sightings, just doing the sightings is not very interesting unless someone's had an experience. But many of them have. When you ask them, did anything else happen or did you feel different after the sighting? Many of them say, you know what, I got very interested in astronomy and I really want to know about this now. And, they'll suddenly find themselves completely redirected. And and I'll think to myself, all started after that sighting. So something happened and it was either a download or they had a pick up and they didn't realise that they'd been picked up for a length of time and something had shifted in them.
Yeah. I mean, do you feel that these sightings in Australia are sort of match everywhere else in the world?
Oh, I think it's global for sure. It's just that, a lot of people never even talk about what's going on. I mean, Agnes here is a little tourist town, barely 4,000 people, barely that, probably about 3,800 now. The number of people here that have had experiences is amazing. I hear, because they know I'm the weird alien lady on top of the hill.
Yeah.
Get people coming quietly to come and see me and say, the other night we saw things over the beach or whatever. I mean, constantly I'm hearing, that's just here. And we've also got the Sasquatch, or we call, we don't call it the Sasquatch here, or Bigfoot or whatever. We're called Yowies here. But I can see from my window, Deepwater Reserve, and there's a guy there that has constant interactions with a Yowie, or a Yowie family. He said, and that's literally just down the road from me, or whatever. What happens is a lot of people don't talk about stuff, David. They're afraid of being laughed at. It's like the crop circles. There are the crop circles here too, but the farmers never talk about it, and what have you. It's happening, I believe, everywhere. It's just that a lot of the time, depending on the culture, depending on the openness of the people, depends on how much you hear about it.
Sure. I mean, the crop circles is quite a big thing. I would say that someone in your area can actually fake them, but I don't believe all of them are faked. Yeah, it's like here, and I think there's a lot of government interference with that to make it look like so you don't know which ones are the real ones or which ones are the fake ones. That's my theory anyway. Well, not just my theory. I think it's some others as well, but.
Oh, I know that some of them have been created by man for sure, but with ones in Australia where you're right out in the outback, several hundred k's away from everything in a little farm somewhere, and something happens, that ain't going to be government faking that, because
there's no point, is there? That's right. It's a lot of work for nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, and and a lot of these farmers won't talk about what they have on their farm or whatever, because they don't want fuss, they don't want publicity, they don't want anything. So, there's absolutely faked ones, but there's also a lot of really genuine ones as well.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. I think probably the majority of them are real, but you do get the odd clever faked ones. But, well, Mary, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you ever so much for sparing the time. I know it's been a bit of an effort for you to find the time, because I've been trying to get this off the ground for a little while now. But so I'm very grateful for you for making the time for me. I will put some links on my Paranormal Dimensions page and the sort of the radio show page for your books. And I hope they continue to do well for you. Have you got any planned trips coming up?
Not only down to the Gold Coast at the end of October for a Paradigm Shift conference, but nothing overseas, although I'm doing an online conference for hybrids literally this Sunday. And I've done Contact in the Desert, that was a recent one as well. And I'm doing another on disclosure and what have you at the beginning of, so they're all online. So actually that makes it easy for people to actually access the information. And I'm putting new information in all my presentations all the time. I'm upgrading them, what have you. Yeah. So there's always going to be new information.
It's like you said, it's like actually meeting people in the flesh, so to speak, isn't it? It's the nice thing. I hope you get to come here again anyway at some point.
Well, we'll see what happens the next year or two, David. Hopefully we'll get some sanity back.
Yeah. I think that's what we all need, a bit of sanity. Anyway, Mary, I'll let you go now. Thank you very much for coming on and telling us some very interesting stories and facts and etc. And it's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you.
Oh, David, it's been an absolute pleasure. And if anyone wants to get my books in England, you just go to the Nexus magazine there, because they have both My Awakening and The New Human. You can order them from Nexus in the UK.
You can also get them on Amazon.
Oh, Alex. Oh, yeah. You can do it that way, or get them from, I suppose you go for what?
I think most people go for Amazon nowadays, don't they?
Thank you, David. It's been an absolute pleasure. And with any luck, we'll get to meet up again in the
I
UK
do hope
at some
so.
point.
Yeah, I shall certainly watch out for you, Mary. Anyway, keep in touch, and I shall be. We do message backwards and forwards a little bit now and again, so hopefully I will get to see you again. But you take care of yourself, and you have a good night. I know it's night over there now.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Mary. Good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that was Mary Rodwell, and thank you very much. And this is David Young on the Paranormal UK Radio Network on Paranormal Dimensions. I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you for joining me. Hope you join me again next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Paranormal Dimensions is as bright and powerful as our celestial star, the sun. And although it's expending thousands of pounds of energy every minute of the day, have no fear. There's plenty left.
Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK radio network.